Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about some miscellaneous social psychology terms. They don't really fit with conformity or obedience, or maybe they have a little bit of everything. And so, first, we're going to start off with how our individual behavior is changed in the presence of the group. So, this time we're not part of a group, we're not conforming to the group because we're not a part of it. It's like the group is there and we're kind of on the outside of the group. And usually we're doing some sort of behavior. And that's what we're talking about. So there's this term called social facilitation, or I don't know if we're talking about social inhibition or social, there we go. Social facilitation is first. And this is how being in front of the group will sometimes make our task, task we're doing, whatever performance or behavior we're doing, will do it better because of a feeling of competition. So Norman Triplett, you see his name on the screen, he did an experiment where he had people reel in like a fishing reel, and he measured how fast they could reel it in. And so they did this. They did this task by themselves, a person by themselves. That was the control group, and the experimental group was in front of a crowd. In front of a crowd, so the people were watching the experimenting group. You'll never guess who did it faster and did their task better. It was the people in front of a group. So the group facilitated their performance, and so it's basically improved tasks are done in the presence of a group. Okay, this only works with simple tasks like reeling in a fishing reel, or very well mastered tasks. Like if you are you play the piano really well, being in front of a group, you'll play it better. It's almost like the home field advantage. If you're really good at that sport, being watched by a group of people, you'll perform better. It's possible why, like during the pandemic, when they brought sports backs, especially in like baseball, they brought a lot of you couldn't have too many fans in the crowd, and so they put like cardboard fans basically to help the players play. The act of not having anyone watch, maybe they weren't performing at their best. But social facilitation says you'll perform better in the presence of a group. Social inhibition is the exact opposite. So this is for really difficult tasks or tasks not learned all that well. Maybe you've just started playing the piano, or maybe you're in Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 and you have to do an oral presentation in front of the class. You might stumble, you're going to do worse in front of a group, and that's social inhibition. So social facilitation, you do better at really easy, simple tasks or tasks that you're well mastered. But if it's a hard task or a task that you have not mastered yet, social inhibition, you will do worse. There's this other term, and I think about this every single day during the pledge, is social loafing. It's when this time you're actually kind of like in the group. So I don't necessarily know why it's the presence of a group that matters, but you're in a group and you're all moving towards the same goal. And so you're not in conflict with these people. You're on the same team. But sometimes when you have a tendency for people to exert less effort because they're in a group. And so if you're pulling all your efforts towards attaining a common goal, you might work less hard because there's other people in the group that will kind of pick up your slack. We see this a lot in group projects. You might not exert as much effort into a group project because someone else will kind of pick up the slack. And I always think of this in morning announcements, when we have to say the pledge every single morning. I always say the pledge like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I say that at my normal volume of voice, but either no one says it or they say it in a very mumbled voice. And that's social loafing. We're all kind of working together, but because we're working together saying the pledge, people exert less effort. They don't try as hard. So de-individuation is not supposed to necessarily be a bullet point underneath social loafing. It's kind of its own bullet point. But this is also in the presence of a group. But this is where you are, maybe your identity is shielded in some way. Maybe you're on the internet and you have like a username. Maybe you're in a group and you have like a mask on. Or maybe you're just like in a big crowd that no one really knows who you are. You might lose your restraints that you typically would have So think of like mob mentality. You feel anonymous in the crowd, and you're more likely to do things that you wouldn't do by yourself. So, on the internet, people say some awful, heinous things to each other because they feel like, you're one person on the internet and they don't know who you are, and you've kind of got this shield between you and them. And they would never say that or act that way in real life, in front of a real person. They probably would never say those things, and but they do because of this feeling of de-individuation. They feel like they're not like their identity is kind of lost. People don't know who they are, and so they kind of get away with acting however they want, that they typically wouldn't do if their name was attached to them, or if it was in public, in person, things like that. Another term is group polarization. So, my question is, what does church camp and the KKK have in common? Well, both of these groups of people have strong ideals, have a strong belief system. It could be a good thing, church camp, or it could be a bad thing, KKK. And so when they get around people that have very similar beliefs, very common beliefs, and then they're asked to talk about those beliefs. So, like, let's say church camp, people get together and they might talk about their religion or their faith. In the KKK groups, they might talk about, I don't know, their racism tendencies and their feelings of, I don't even know, hate. But whenever they start talking with people who believe the same things they do, their beliefs, their feelings get stronger. So they become polarized. They become even more extreme versions of that belief. So when you get, when you get together, you just become more polarized in that group idea, which can sometimes lead to this idea, which is group think. I don't know if see this picture. Okay, here, let me move my camera here. This is basically high prejudice groups and low prejudice groups, and then they started talking about prejudices, going back to group polarization. And you see that the high prejudice groups, their prejudice actually grew after talking about it. Low prejudice groups, their lack of prejudice got even lower after talking about it. So that just goes to show they became polarized. They went to the extremes. So I don't know if you know this picture down here. This is a picture of the Challenger explosion in the 80s. And this was kind of, it was a disaster for NASA and for the shuttle program, but it could have been avoided if someone had spoken up and if the people listening actually listened. So groupthink is when well-intentioned people make irrational or non-optimal decisions that are spurred by the urge to conform and the discouragement of dissent. So there is a strong feeling. Groupthink is never a good thing. There's a strong feeling for people to agree and to conform. It's like, we're all doing this, right? Right, guys, we're all doing this. And there is discouragement of dissent. So if people want to stand up and say no, they are discouraged by the group. So here's what happened with the Challenger explosion. There was pressure by Congress and by NASA to have a launch in space on time. If there's a really good Netflix documentary right now about the Challenger explosion, I strongly recommend watching it. It's a few episodes long. It's really good. And, they had these shuttle takeoffs before, but they were always delayed by several months sometimes, and there's always some problems. And NASA wasn't getting as much review and news, and it wasn't as popular as it had been in the 60s and the 70s. So they decided, hey, let's put a non-astronaut on the spaceship. Let's put a teacher, an elementary school science teacher, on the spaceship. And there had been reports that, there was this little piece of rubber that wasn't getting a good seal. And the rubber is basically what separated the fuel from the fire in the explosion of the tanks. And it was melting. And there's reports that this was melting, but there was discouragement to hey, we're not going to talk about that. Let's not focus on that. That's a negative thing. Stop bringing that up. Why are you so worried about that? And this O-ring, this seal was often breaking in cold weather. And in Florida, the day of liftoff, it was an extremely cold day. There was ice actually on the shuttle itself, but there was so much pressure to have a go for launch from the nation, from NASA, from Congress, that it was like, we're all going to do this, right? No one's going to back out now, right? Right? There's no reason to. And they had to go for launch, and like 30 seconds after takeoff, the entire shuttle exploded because the O-ring failed, like people knew it was. And so after everyone was killed in the incident, um, you know, they look back and they're like, oh yeah, a whole bunch of people said something, but every time they wanted to say, hey, we shouldn't have takeoff, or hey, we should, delay the launch again, they were put down in their place and like, no, that's not what we want to hear right now. We want to hear a go for launch, not a no. And because of that, it led to well-intentioned people. They didn't mean for these astronauts and this teacher to die. But unfortunately, they made an irrational choice, a non optimal decision, because of the feeling of we got to do this. We're all in it together. We want group harmony. We want everyone to be on the same page, even though a lot of people were not on that page. It seemed like they were, because they wanted this feeling of harmony and conformity. And, we're all going to do this, right, guys? And that led to a really bad time in American history. So the next thing I think we're going to talk about uh, is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I use this term in economics a lot. It occurs when a person's belief about others lead one to act in ways that induce the others to peer confirm their belief. Okay, so here's a little example. Let's say that I assume my assumption is Lacey is lazy and never takes initiative and needs to constantly be supported. So you have a feeling or a belief, um, maybe a prejudice towards someone. And this is an example. You believe that Lacey is lazy, and you start to act in a way that confirms your belief. You act in a way that treats people in a certain way, where then they just fulfill the idea that you had for them in the first place. So your behavior is you tell Lacey exactly what to do, and you check up on her so often because you know she's lazy, right? She's just not going to do anything ever. So you're going to keep watching her, keep watching her. The employee thinks, man, my boss is always checking up on me. And so you assume, like, man, this person never gets started. They don't do anything on their own, because I have to keep checking up on them. Well, then this person maybe either avoids you completely, or they just like, oh, they don't really want to do anything without them telling me, because they keep telling me exactly how to do it. So I'll just wait for them to tell me. And that's exactly right. They're taking no initiative and they're lazy. You were right the whole time. So you treat them in a way that they start acting the way that you treat them. So maybe your parents treat you like a child, and therefore you start acting like a child. And so they were right. You're immature the whole time. They knew it. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If your beliefs in someone kind of cause them to act that, fulfilling what you thought about them in the first place. Okay, that is all we're doing today. It was miscellaneous. We're going to talk about race and prejudice tomorrow. And here's a little preview of that. But that was just miscellaneous things in social psychology, and some terms and some examples of those things. Anyway, guys, have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you later. Bye.